Great. Okay, thank you. Welcome to today's meeting of the External Services Select Committee at London Borough of Hillingdon. This meeting is being broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London. The purpose of this committee is to monitor services provided by external organisations within its remit and review their performance. We also undertake in-depth reviews and witness sessions on specific topics and submit our findings to the decision-making cabinet. My name is Councillor Nick Denys and I am chairman of this committee. Before we start, I have some important housekeeping for everyone present. Please ensure any mobile phones around you are on silent. We are not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm does go off, please follow officers, who is Nikki at the moment, out of this building. Please keep your microphone muted when you aren't speaking, then unmute to speak. So you press the button. We can all hear each other, but the people on YouTube who are watching can't hear if we don't have our microphones on. So yeah, I will remind people if they don't. And as chairman, I will call on those to speak during the meeting. So, okay, we're ready to go through the agenda. Nikki, do we have any apologies for absence?
Chairman, there are no apologies for absence.
Okay. Are there any declarations of interest at this meeting? No. Fantastic. Good. Item 3, well, everything's going to be in public, I think, so that's all okay. Are we happy with the minutes of the last meeting from the 23rd of November? Yep, okay, I'll take that as them being approved. Right, okay, fantastic. So, we're now on to item 5, which is update on the implementation of recommendations from past reviews committee on GP pressures. Now, this review was done in 2020, which feels like a long, long time ago. We had an update last year, which was only partial because obviously COVID had changed a lot of things, and so we suggested that maybe we could review it again a year from last year. But obviously, in a sense, the pressures and the issues around COVID have remained. So even those issues have remained. So you'll find in your papers essentially our recommendations and what has been done about our recommendations. I propose that we don't revisit this again because I think we're at a stage now what's been done has been done and what's not been done has not been done, and we're in a new phase. But talking about a new phase, I am aware that currently the local CCG and GPs are looking at how they provide online GP services, and I think the contract they have for some of the electronics behind that is coming up, and they're thinking about looking at it again. And I know this is a massive issue and a lot of people are interested in this issue, access to GPs, how it might work. So what I would propose that we would do is at our next meeting, we already have one substantive item. If we add as a second item, ask for an update on what's going on with that, just because I feel like it's important that it's put out there because this is one of those issues that people care about. June.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we do need to look at it again and not just let it go like that, because there are still things that we need to really identify and update on what's happening. And as things progressing so fast at a pace now with the changes that are happening, I think we should revisit it. And hopefully we get something out from Hillingdon Hospital in regards to what is moving in the dynamics of that. So I think we should really keep it on board for the time being.
Are you talking about all the recommendations maybe we should revisit next year?
I think the whole lot, and then we can really identify which one dealt with, which one hasn't, and then we can progress with that.
Okay, how does everyone else feel? I'm happy with that. All right, well, we'll bring this report back again next year, hoping that we've had stability thanks to COVID and some of those other measures might be able to be brought in place. But I think I would like agreement on the suggestion that our next meeting we get an update about the online services and GPs and how that's working, because I think that is something that we should be questioning and getting out in the open. Okay, brilliant. So that's agreed. Okay, fantastic. Right, so now we move on to our substantial item, which is an update on the Hillingdon Hospital redevelopment. So about 7 or 8 months ago, I forget because time is just completely a mad thing at the moment with all the in-out, offline, online stuff. But we had a very good presentation on where we're at in terms of the Hillingdon Hospital rebuild. So and at that we asked Jason and his team to come back to give us an update at this juncture, because we felt like this would be an important juncture where there'd be hopefully some interesting updates and progress. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Jason now to take over in this meeting and give us a full presentation with his team, and and then we can ask questions at the end. So obviously, as people are talking, just note questions down, and we'll ask questions at the end. So, Jason, are you happy to take it away?
Thank you, Chair, and we'll all share the microphone. Thank you. So it was April 2021 we were last here, so gosh, we've got sort of a lot to tell you. In terms of the team, from the right-hand side you've got Sarah Bellman, who's our communications lead. You've got Graham from IBI, who will be leading on estates tonight. Apologies from Tahir Ahmed, he's been ill this week. Professor Abbas Kaku, who is our clinical lead for the programme, and Rachel, who's our programme director, and I'm sure would have worked out the clicky thing by the time we go to the next slide. Yeah. No. Where should point up?
Where's it point to?
So whilst we're just working that through, I'll just talk through the introduction slide. So what we're going to give you is an overview of the progress, which will be Rachel. There will be a piece on the design, development and planning application, which Graham will cover. A piece on the engagement, which Sarah will update. The next steps will be Rachel, and then, Chair, if it's okay, we'll do Q&A and we'll filter it through. So technology's back, so I'll hand over to Rachel.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason. So I guess we just wanted to start with a reminder of the three-stage process that we have to follow for business case approval in the NHS. So we start with a strategic outline case, and you'll recall that our strategic outline case has been approved. That sets the strategic context and the options that we were considering. We then move on to the outline business case. That's where we are at this point in time. So we're developing the preferred option in more detail at the moment, and we're looking to submit our planning application. And then we move to the full business case process, where we develop the preferred option to the next level of detail, so that we're ready to enter into contracts at the end of that period. So that's the process that we follow. We're currently in the outline business case stage, and this next slide really just shows more detail of the indicative timeline to the opening of the new hospital. I have to stress it is indicative, and it's obviously there are lots of variables here, and it is pending agreement from the new hospitals programme team. But this is what we're working to. So you can see that, having started developing the outline business case late 2020, we're nearing completion. So our expectation is that we will be ready to submit it in June. And if all goes to plan around this timeline, then what we would see is that we would move to the full business case stage later on this year. And during that stage, we would also clear the site, so that by the time we get full business case approval, the site is cleared and we're ready to start the new build in January 2024, with the view to completing in 2027. So that's our indicative timeline that we're working to, subject to agreement from the new hospitals programme team. So I then just wanted to say just a little bit about what's been happening, the progress that we've made since we last met with you to provide a detailed update. So, I think we've made some really good progress over the last 6 months. We've worked really closely with our partners nationally, regionally and locally, and we're very grateful to partners for supporting us with this work, and it's enabled us to get to this point. We've had a lot of engagement nationally with the new hospitals programme team, and that's really important because we need to make sure that we are, we're across ministerial priorities, and things like net zero carbon, modern methods of construction. We'll talk about those a little bit more in a moment. We need to ensure that we're across those and we are building those into our plans so that we ensure that our business cases have a smooth transit through the approvals process. So we're having good conversations with them. There's been a lot of detailed work done during this period on the designs. So that's involved clinical teams from across the hospital and also some clinicians from outside of the hospital to support the development of those plans. And we've been really mindful in doing that of the feedback that we've received. I mean, firstly from the planners, but also from our staff and from public engagement. So that, and also from the New Hospitals Programme team. So our designs have iterated to reflect all of that feedback. So we're now, those detailed designs are now nearing completion. The other thing that we've been doing is progressing a range of strategies, refining a range of strategies that inform our outline business case and are also necessary for us to append to the outline business case. So one of them is the, we're still on the right slide. One of them is the estate strategy. So we've developed that. It's been endorsed by the North West London Integrated Care System, so it's consistent with the North West London Estate Strategy. We've also been refreshing our clinical services strategy. So we've done that with partners, including Hillingdon Health and Care Partners. We've also been doing some work on our workforce plan to submit the outline, to support the outline business case submission. And we've also continued working with Hillingdon Health and Care Partners on plans to transform services. So all of that's carried on. Alongside that, you'll probably be aware that we've had a number of meetings now with the planners, London Borough of Hillingdon. So we've had 5 planning performance agreement meetings, and we have, as I said, we've been iterating our designs based on that feedback, and that's all helping to inform our final planning application that we're working towards submitting at the end of April. I guess finally, just to say that we've also continued extensive public engagement. We launched our public exhibition in June. We've got lots of feedback from that, which has been really helpful, again, in helping us to iterate our plans. Because of the situation, we do acknowledge that much of the engagement has been online. During the summer and into the autumn, we did do quite a bit of face-to-face engagement. Obviously, we had to stop that more recently, but we are absolutely gearing up to do more of that going forward, and Sarah will talk more about that. So I'll stop there and hand over to Graham Harris, who's going to talk about design development.
Up top seats.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Jason. I'll sit next to Rachel. Thanks.
It's very confusing when we do Q&A now.
We'll jump back into our seats. Yes. So hopefully you can hear me. Just picking up on what Rachel just said, in terms of the development of the hospital, since last year we've taken the scheme from where we did the 1 to 500 blocks, which was kind of how we organized the hospital together so that the departments were in the right place. And we've started to really work through all of the details. So we've been developing the plans on a room-by-room basis with all of the different clinical groups. And we've just completed that sort of round of design development. So we know that what we've got within the building is the right type of accommodation and it's in the right places. A lot of work has gone on to that, and one of the bullet points we put up there was that during the summer of last year, we did an enormous exercise to make sure that our building was exactly the right size that could be afforded. And that's a very important thing, because there are a lot of hospitals competing for a limited budget across the national programme. And for us on the Hillingdon team, we want to make sure that our hospital does not grow in cost. Its budget is what we set out at the start. And so a lot of work is focused on that, and we've been very heavily involved with that, and I think Abbas and his team of clinicians have been very aware of that. We're not gilding the lily in any places where we can't. So we've talked a bit about the need for us to meet a whole lot of criteria to get planning. Obviously, we've had a lot of discussions with the planners. We are targeting to get a planning application in by April. That's really tough going. But the reason we're pushing on that is that we strongly believe that if we go and complete our outline business case with a full planning permission, it's a hell of a lot stronger when we come to looking at all the national hospitals seeking funding to have that planning permission in place. So it's been a big drive. If you could pop on to the next slide, thanks. We've talked a lot about the need for modern methods of construction, and for those of you who are not in the construction industry, it's a slightly mystical term, but it's a lot more than just looking at stuff that can be manufactured in factories and brought to site at a later date. The important thing of looking at these systems is that when we look at the shapes of rooms, how we furnish rooms, that sort of thing, if we can maximize the standardization, we get a better cost and better value for money. But more importantly, we know that we're building right next to an existing hospital that still has to consider delivering services throughout that construction period. So one of our constraints has been to build a building as quickly as possible in a single phase. And the importance of that is that we don't disturb how things currently run. And to make that even more viable and to shorten the program times on site is why we're looking at these modern methods of construction. So the more stuff we can build in a factory and bring to site, the less disruption for the residents, for the people who use the hospital, and those are all very heavy considerations that we're thinking about. There is a drive within the NHS to make sure that everything goes to net zero carbon. That is a huge task. So a lot of the design has focused on how we do the mechanical and electrical servicing with the clinical design. So it's been a really tight drive to get that stuff in, because we know if we don't get it in from the start, we've got no chance when we come on to actually developing it with a contractor. And the importance of trying to push on all those things in a short time frame between now and when the outline business case is completed is to make our project within all of the national hospitals as attractive as possible to potential contractors who will build it. Because there is a lot of risk involved with that, and so the more we can have as confidence, the better we think our hospital will be from that perspective. So a lot of work's gone into that. If I pop onto the next slide, thanks. So in terms of the planning application, we have set up a number of different strains or sort of strings we're working with the local planning authority on, and we focused on each of the sort of key elements that need to be dealt with as part of a large-scale development like a hospital. So we've been specifically dealing with separate meetings for highways, for flooding, for ecology, for biodiversity, all of those things, because the more of those things we can line up ahead of going in for a planning application, we believe that we're in a stronger position to then make that whole process easier. And to complement that, we have now had 5 pre-planning application meetings, and a lot of those have been to demonstrate where we have had challenges put to us by the local planning authority as to how we've addressed that. So things like multi-story car parks, traffic flows, ensuring that we have the correct flows for ambulance blue lights, that we step back and provide landscaping and buffer zones between the hospital and the surrounding housing, because a lot of that, it's a big building going into a sort of residential area, but we're aware of that, and so we've been going through those discussions to ensure that we have the support from the planners so that when we do go into the full planning application, everybody in each department is aware of where the journey's been to date. We do currently have a meeting, in fact it's next week, with the Greater London Authority, and that will be the sort of final one of our sort of mini meetings that we're having ahead of preparing the full planning application. So that's all moving in time for our April application, and we're confident we'll get there with that. I think over to Sarah, probably. Do you want to swap seats?
Thank you. Well, I'm going to be Jason for a while. Brilliant. we've talked a little bit with you guys before about the public exhibition, but just to run through what we ended up doing. So we did the public exhibition June, July, August time over summer. Now, as Rachel's alluded to, that had to be a lot more online than we would have ideally liked, and it has meant that a lot of more of our engagement has been online. We did at the end of summer, as restrictions started lifting, we went to the Love Uxbridge Festival. And that was fantastic because it did get us to meet a lot more people who would not have actively come to our exhibition online, but actually we take it out, which was absolutely what we wanted to do if we hadn't have had COVID to contend with as well. So we got an awful lot of feedback from that exhibition. What we did is we looked at that in a number of ways. We fed everything that we heard into the teams, the 1 to 500, the 1 to 200 planning work, so that all of that could be considered. We then looked at what were the demographic information that we knew about who we'd heard from, but also what were sort of the geographic areas. Now, unsurprisingly, an awful lot of the feedback came from predominantly sort of very local to the hospital, and that's partly because we did do some very specific webinars with our nearest neighbours, and we sort of flyered within a sort of a couple of miles of the hospital to make sure that people were very aware of the work, and especially with the planning process, that we were talking to sort of the closest neighbours about sort of the impact of the building, and their sort of any comments they had about the views and the construction process. Now that has all helped us to plan the phase 3 work, which we are in at the moment. Can I stop onto the next slide, Rachel? Thank you. So again, we'd set up a number of roadshows. So we were having one in the north of the borough, one in Uxbridge, and one down in Heathrow Villages. Once again, with the emergence of Omicron, we had to move those online. So those roadshows are happening online at the moment, but as we're seeing restrictions lifted, the work is underway at the moment to put those back in so that we can go and do that on-the-ground engagement, and hopefully we'll do quite a few roadshows across the borough. What we have been doing is we're also working with the clinical teams to understand where we can do some really specific engagement. So not just general comments about the hospital and what it looks like, but we've been working with children's groups. So next week we're going out to 2 children's centres in the borough to talk to mothers, people who have recently been through the maternity departments, to get some feedback from them. We've been doing some work with the children and young people's team at the hospital, so we've got some quite nice worksheets and sort of like colouring sheets that the kids can do, and draw their favourite parts of the hospital to kind of like give us the feedback from sort of a different perspective. We've done a survey recently with radiology to talk to patients who regularly use the radiology services to better understand what they would like from waiting areas, for example. So we have been doing quite a lot with patients and with staff groups and with the public. As I say, a lot of that has been online. A lot more of that will be moving face to face. So we will be able to sort of, where we know that we've got some gaps in certainly the digital exclusion and certain communities that we haven't yet reached, we will be able to address that in the coming months.
Okay. Thank you. So if I just end then by just sort of summarising really our next steps. So we're working really hard at the moment to finalise the outline business case. So that's going to be happening through February, March and into April, so that by the end of April it's finalised and we've got a product that we can then take through our internal governance during May, and then with the agreement of the new hospitals programme team, we'll seek to submit that outline business case thereafter. I guess the other thing to say, which we've already alluded to, is we are also working up our final planning application for submission at the end of April. So they're our immediate next steps. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
More questions?
Yes. Jason, you should go back to the microphone because I've got a couple of questions before I open it up to the rest of the committee, and I think the first one's definitely for you, Jason. Right at the beginning, you said that subject to agreement from the new hospital programme team, and then Graham mentioned about obviously the fact that other hospitals are trying to, obviously get hospitals rebuilt and all this sort of stuff, and there's a certain pot of money and how far it will go. There's lots of detailed work, which is great, but how confident are you that we're going to get the money to be able to do this?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the wider context, there was an announcement in the autumn of 2020 concerning sort of a national infrastructure programme for hospitals. The headlines from that were 40 hospitals were named in England to be built. And in the autumn of 2021, a bidding process was sort of gone out across the NHS for the additional 8. So by summer 2022, there will be 48 named new hospitals as part of the health infrastructure plan. From our perspective, what we're trying to do is position ourselves in terms of that next tranche of hospitals that are going to be built. So there's a number of hospitals already in train that sometimes you see on the news. So Brighton, Liverpool, Birmingham as well. After those are completed, in that what is the sort of new tranche of hospitals to be built, absolutely positioning ourselves at the front of that pack with a number of others. With that, I'd hope the correlation would be, as they sort of finalise the ongoing funding for the new hospitals programme, those at the front of the pack will be able to secure the relevant funding to build those hospitals. So absolutely working in sort of close collaboration with the new hospitals programme. I think as Graham and Rachel have said, that we meet all the criteria. So in terms of all the elements that we know that the Treasury will require to show absolutely best value for money for taxpayers, we think we've incorporated that in our current design. So we're hopeful that as the new hospitals programme sort of finalise their overall funding, we're very much seen as one of the first ones that would get funded.
No, thank you. I mean, we can see the amount of work that's been done, and to use a phrase that has been used politically, sometimes it seems you're oven ready almost, which obviously is very useful if you're asking for money, because the Treasury wants to give money to certainty, doesn't it? So I'm sure that will help. Okay, well, we'll keep a watch on that. And my second question, which is a big, broad brush question, so might involve a number of people answering, or might not. Obviously, we all know we need a new hospital. That is without doubt. Just if you rebuilt the same walls but in better, that is so needed. But obviously, this gives us a chance to build a better hospital. So convince me that we're going to build a better hospital in terms of health services we provide.
So if you're at chair, I'll start, and then I'll look at my colleagues' faces about whether I'm doing a good job, and then they might want to chip in. I think you're absolutely right. The building is part of it, and so from serving our local population, absolutely that we need a building that's fit for purpose in terms of actually being new. But the crux of it is to be fit for purpose clinically, and from a patient perspective, it's got to be leaps and bounds better than what we currently provide. So I think probably looking around the faces, I think you've all been at Hillingdon over the years. If you look at the layout, if you look at how the adjacencies work, there is so much that's been incorporated in the new design, that the clinical engagement. So if you think, when we were referencing the earlier conversation around COVID, the clinical engagement with everything that staff have been facing over the last couple of years has been absolutely fantastic. So the key piece for us is to have been absolutely assured that the clinicians are driving the agenda with IBI, with sort of world-class support to design the best hospital. But again, never let it be fooled that we as experts know everything. So it's a piece about the public engagement. There are things that we think we've done brilliantly, and people in terms of the feedback have said, well, actually, how about changing that or doing this? Or from our perspective, this would work better. So I think in terms of that, it's really coming together just within that. The other bit I've got to mention is sort of Caroline with her Hillingdon Health and Care Partners hat on, because we want the hospital absolutely to be part of a local sort of system of care, and I think that's the key piece where working with all the partners in Hillingdon has been brilliant. So from a personal perspective as a patient, yes, you want your hospital to be brilliant, but actually for much of your care you shouldn't or want to really go to the hospital. And that's the key piece in terms of how we're looking at, over the next few years, further enhancing some of the pathways our patients go through at the moment to have the best care. And I think that's really coming together actually now at a local level. So I don't know from my colleagues, they're either going to look at me and go, no, he didn't answer that correctly, or broadly, you happy with that?
I would.
Yeah.
So you ask a broad brush question, you're going to get a broad brush answer, which is fair enough. But I would appreciate some examples, from maybe from other panelists as well, because just so we can get a feel for it, what some of this better stuff will look like.
Yeah, I mean, start with you. Do you want to hand the microphone?
Yes, I think that's a great question, actually, Chair. I think the way we positioned it is it started off with the clinical services strategy, which wasn't just Hillingdon, the hospital. It was actually, where does secondary care fit in the whole vehicle of health and care within the borough, and a wider piece in North West London. And so we got our clinicians, our operational teams, all of our partners, Hillingdon Health and Care, Imperial, London North West, all spending some time looking at what those models of care look like. And then the iterations of the new hospital are to complement those models of care. So essentially, the premises then become the vehicle for delivering those models of care. And that's what it's all about. And, I mean, you wanted some examples. So, for example, we know that in terms of emergency care, that a lot of patients that present, actually, if you use something called same-day emergency care, you have rapid assessment, you have diagnostics on site, you have senior clinicians all operating in one area, then you can make those decisions so patients aren't admitted to the hospital. So the urgent emergency care has been considerably enlarged, and all of those sort of the emergency department, urgent care centre, the same-day emergency care, the frailty unit are all co-located, and at the centre of that is a diagnostic hub, because we know that patients require ultrasound, CT 24/7, and there's no point in them going 200-300 yards up and down the corridor. It needs to be right there. So that's an example. The other example is we know that if you become sick, and the demographics of the population, then even if your care can be managed in the community, actually if you come in sick, you're more likely to be really sick. So we've doubled the size of our critical care unit. So that, and for elective care, so these are some examples. We know that for elective care, that we do a lot of procedures. So there's benchmarking of operations and how many you can perform as day cases. We have the clinical skills to do that, but we're hampered by the environment. So if you have a correctly kitted out outpatient area, you can do more of your operation. You can do more of the day cases in outpatients, and you can actually do more of the inpatient theatre work as a day case procedure. So it's all of that work, and plus, for example, we know even in elective care, whether you've got cancer, whether you've got other health problems, you're going to need more diagnostics. So we've put in more endoscopy for cancer screening. We've got, at the moment, we have one MRI and one mobile MRI. In the new hospital, there will be 3, all as part of the build, and the number of CT scanners will increase from 2 to 5. So these are examples of where we see the future models of care and how the hospital and the equipment within it facilitates. And I could go on about maternity, children and young people, inpatient care. And the other bit that is really important is the whole infection prevention and control. So having more single rooms. So if we had a norovirus outbreak, we would close, had 1 or 2 cases, you have to close the whole ward, because we'll have a minimum of 70 or 80% single rooms, A, privacy and dignity, and secondly, if you have one area of a ward that has to be, not used because there's a break there, you can actually carry on quite safely with the other bits. And pandemic proofing is really, important. And of course, the privacy and dignity. So, if you had 2 or 3 hours, I could go on, but it just gives you an example, and it's why the staff are so enthused about this, because it's they work in a really old building and they're fed up of it, but they also see that actually the way the department is organised within a hospital, and we've added on little bits. I mean, I've been a consultant there at 25, 30 years, so we've added on different bits in the wrong places, and this is a once, in a lifetime opportunity to get it all right, really. And I know Graham wanted to say something about
the only thing I was going to touch on is I think it probably will show itself best in the outpatient department or an outpatient area where people who are visiting the hospital, that whole route in and route out, and what people expect from a hospital nowadays. If you go to the current hospital, I'm sure you will have seen the IT cables that have been stuck to all the walls. Those are things that have developed since the hospital was originally built. So putting in the right levels of IT infrastructure into the right places and making that whole process in the outpatient area much more streamlined, so that when you arrive at the hospital, you want to wait for something, you don't have to wait in a hospital waiting room, you can wait in like a coffee shop or something like that. Those types of things can be built into the whole process, so that one-stop shop in and out of the hospital is far better than what it is at the moment.
Great, thank you. No, that is really useful, because that gives us such a feel that actually, the fact you're really excited about what potentially could be happen makes me very excited as well. So thank you. So if any of our committee members have any sort of specific areas, I'm sure they'll ask those. Okay, I'll go for Simon first.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 3 short questions, hopefully. Jason, just following up on the Chairman's first question about the likelihood of it being built. So presumably there is still a likelihood that the finance will get turned down and it won't be constructed, is that right?
So I think in terms of what we presented today, the nuance that I think has certainly changed over the last year is it's not a case of if, it's a case of when. And I think the key bit there is we're absolutely pushing that timeline and asking our sort of national colleagues to work with us at that, because the scheme has got such momentum. So if you think at a local level how everybody is so supportive and sort of so going above and beyond what's required in ensuring that we absolutely get the sort of the best case put forward. And we've got that at a Hillingdon level. You've also got that, so with these sort of integrated care systems developing for North West London, the North West London integrated care system is absolutely supportive as well. London, so in terms of the NHS at a London level, are absolutely supportive. And then for all those other people at a national level who are really being sort of, again, integral to how we've developed our business case, that's the piece where we're absolutely pushing it now, because I think we've got such a good opportunity.
Thank you. The other completely different question is, you said you met, I think it was Graham said you met with pre-planning in Hillingdon. How has that relationship been? Have they been helpful, cooperative, or?
Yes, they have been helpful. I mean, we've obviously had some challenges because we're looking at a big building going into a largely residential area. So we've had key sort of guidance on specific things that they really want us to see. So one of the things was how much more could we push the landscaping and retaining the trees, and a lot of that relates to flooding and being able to map out our roads around the hospital so that we minimize the effects of flooding. So those things have been really useful. I think they've been very proactive in the suggestions. Some of them are quite challenging, some of the suggestions. It's like you come out of a meeting, you think, how are we going to achieve that? But the reality is it has all helped to drive the design in the way it needs to go. And just to touch on your other point with the funding, one of the key discussions with the planning authority is a very good understanding of we've got a limited envelope in terms of money that we can potentially spend, and for us it's essential that we keep that, keep the design within that. We don't do pie in the sky things that we know will just get chucked out at the first round. So I think it's been a very measured approach, and some of the things from a planning point of view are probably from the planning authority are probably seen as this is not first prize, it might be second prize, but we understand why we've got certain things to solve to keep the budget within tax. So I think they've been helpful.
That's really good to hear, thank you. And my last question was it was something we spoke about, I can't remember if it was last meeting or the meeting before, but you talked a lot about how critical it is on this build to make sure that the patient flow as such is much better than it currently is. Is that still very integral to the plans?
Short answer is oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So the 1 in 200 process, there's something called the clinical briefs, which is a fairly standard format, but actually in that is a section about how you map through patient flows. And so that's between departments, but actually at the 1 in 200 stage, actually once you've reached a department, how you then, so your reception is next to your weighing room, is next to your, waiting area. And so the clinicians have all been working, on that, and that's where, Sarah's talking about some of the patient engagement. I mean, that'll be refined at the 1 in 50 stage, even more, which will be after the outline business case has hopefully been approved. And so, and the really exciting thing is we've now started to see from Graham and his team some sort of, or what do you call them, through like walkthrough models?
Sort of walkthrough visual,
yeah,
so that you get an understanding.
Yeah, so you're actually not seeing like a floor plan that you might actually, kind of with the room size, but actually you're starting to see, okay, if I walk through this department, and you start to see the 3D, but you also start to see really important things like the natural light and other aspects of the hospital. So it all really comes together, and I think what's been really exciting for me is that it is the patients, the clinicians, working with the healthcare planners and the architects to co-create this, and importantly also going to other hospitals. So what does best in class look like in other areas? So we've visited either virtually or in person quite a few other hospitals. So we've picked out what doesn't work and what does work in terms of patient flow. And it's an iterative process that will continue until the new hospital, the first brick, or whatever it is, modern methods of construction.
Something much bigger than brick.
It is actually laid. And the other really important thing is okay, hopefully pandemic won't be much of the lifetime of a hospital, but we've got to plan a hospital that, that if you need to divert a sort of a red and a green type stream, all of the departments that will need to cope with both those streams at once. Some won't, like some of the elective work, that we make sure that we have, a contingency but very clear pathway for those groups of patients as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John.
June.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sounds very nice. I am so happy, hoping in my lifetime that I will see it through. I've got lots of questions. In regards to when the new bill is starting to work, where will the patient, because you'll be working around the patients, and obviously that will have quite a lot of impact, even though some of the stuff is going to be done factory-wise to come in. How are you going to ring-fence those patients and having the service continue the way it is? Because at the moment it's dismal down at Hillingdon Hospital. So if I can get an answer to that. The other, I'm going to give you all of mine in one go, and then everyone can come together on it. In the public consultation that was conducted, Sarah said there was 30,000 residents who visited the road shows and so forth, but you only get 360 response. So I want to know, what have you done in regards to expanding on that? You said you took the road show around Hillingdon. You've mentioned the north, the east, and Heathrow villages. The south side of the borough is one of the biggest side of the borough as well. What happened about Hayes, and what happened about the other side of the south of the borough? What's in place for that? Because you did not mention that. And I think it would be unjust if the residents in Hayes, as you know, getting people to come to consultation is a very difficult task. So you need to have things at the door for individuals to come and give the response or walk in doing the shopping to come in and say, oh, this is what's happening, so you get a better response. What are you doing about that?
Okay, so to try and answer the first question, and I hope I'll answer it, and I'm sure that Jason and Abbas and the team can jump in. I said one of the first things we're looking at is to make sure that we can build the hospital in one phase. And what we're looking at is, at the moment, going through all of the buildings that are sort of on the periphery of the site, that are out, that are either underutilized or have, and move. There's a whole lot of moves within inside the hospital to move people around, to move bits of departments and services around within the existing hospital. That ensures that all of that can remain running, so that when you create a site, it's completely isolated away from where the main entrances are and where you access the emergency department or the outpatient department of the existing hospital, so that all of those can keep running. And then we'll be able to define a site that is contained within a hoarding line that will allow for the building of the hospital to all happen in one go, so that everything else keeps running pretty much as is. There'll be a few moves that will happen over the next 2 years of key departments within where they sit on the existing hospital site, and they might move from building A to building B, but those sort of what we're calling the logistics plans or the decant plans, those are all being put in place now, so that by the time that the funding is approved and we can get to the point where a contractor is eventually appointed, that those decant plans have already been carried out, so that all the services keep running. So I don't know if that answers the question, but hopefully, there is a decant plan to be able to enable that to happen. And then it's over to you.
Sorry, Graham, just before you go, I've got a quick follow-up on that one. Two points, I suppose, because, at the moment, when I go to hospital, I go for something regular, and essentially I know where to go. It wouldn't make logical sense to anybody who didn't know where to go, but I know to go because I've been going there for 5 years. But obviously, if that all changes, I think there'd be two things that possibly be very helpful. Of course, having people around, I don't know, wearing sachets who are people who can, if you get lost, you can ask, how can I help? But also, clear instructions about how to get there from the entrance. So, I go to the diabetic care regularly. I know where it is, but if it gets moved, rather than saying you're going to diabetic care and then getting there and getting lost, if it said actually it's moved here, from the front entrance you go here, 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 and here. I don't know how logistically possible, of course, that is, because that might be a huge task. But in theory, that would be really helpful as well. So
I was going to say that's one of the tasks that won't fall onto me. I've got to get everything into the new plans, but I think Sarah's probably going to have to pick that up.
So if I just pick that bit up first, so I think that's where there is a big communications element, both in terms of, as you say, people who are on the site and can support with that wayfinding, but also in terms of how we communicate with patients in advance. So that's sort of through letters and information to people who are going regularly and who are getting sort of their appointments, but also making sure that there is that really clear instruction at the front door. So that's sort of a very big piece of work, but one that will be really important, as you say, to make sure that people don't get sort of lost on the way to appointments and things. If I can pick up Councillor Nelson's point, so in terms of the feedback, I'd have absolutely loved if every single person visiting had filled out a feedback form. That would obviously been brilliant. I think the reality is some people go because they're just interested and there's a bit of an awareness raising and they kind of see it and go, oh, okay, that looks all right, off I go. And then some people have a lot to say, either because there's something they like, something they don't like, they've had a really sort of specific experience, they perhaps use the hospital a long time, so they've got a lot to say. So that initial point of contact of here's our early plans, what do you think? It does get that sort of what feels like a lower response when you look at the big picture, but actually in terms of the percentage that you would expect to get for this kind of consultation is actually still quite a good number. Now that doesn't mean that we say great, on paper that's a good number, we'll stop. Because the point you raise about where did we go and did we go across all the borough, that's what we started to do, and we started to have those roadshows in place. So I mentioned the ones that we'd started to plan. They all got pulled back online because of the change in restrictions and Plan B. So the bit that we are doing now is having a look at everything and saying, right, where do we need to go? And it's not, I mentioned sort of like the North Uxbridge and Heathrow villages, because that's the three that we had, the first three that we had planned. We are planning to do things across the whole of Hillingdon. The key thing for us is we need to hear from a broad range of people, and people sort of represent the whole catchment of the hospital. So it's not just that sort of local area, but it is sort of quite broad. So the next phase very much is, it is those roadshows, so going to places where people are, exactly as you say, so whether that's sort of in the high street, pre-existing events, sort of places where there is quite a high footfall and we can speak to people, a bit like when we did the Love Uxbridge Festival. We definitely spoke to a lot of people who would not have proactively chosen to come and see the exhibition. There's a lot of group-specific outreach. So I mentioned the 2 children's centres that we're going to next week. We've got some plans already underway for a focus group with people with learning disabilities and their carers. They're just a couple that we've got planned for next week. We're very much looking at those different patient groups and different groups of people who use the hospital going out to there. And then there's the outreach and engagement work. So if we look at what we've done in the borough for throughout COVID, there has been a huge programme of work around encouraging different groups to get their vaccine, and a lot of that has been the one-to-one conversations about hesitancy and things like that. That has given us some really good relationships across the borough, and it's started to build that relationship with certain groups between the NHS, and we have heard the best ways that they like to engage. So a lot of what we can do for the redevelopment builds across that wider work that's going on across sort of the NHS in North West London, and we can say, right, we've got these relationships, we've got these connections with these groups, we will continue to have those conversations and build the redevelopment work within that. I think the final thing that I would say is, if there are particular locations that any of you feel will be a very, very good place to go, please do let us know, because as much as we will try and make sure that we go everywhere, you will have that far more insight of that local knowledge, and I don't want to miss anything just because we've not been aware. So please do let me know, and we'll build that into the plans.
Thank you. Two things. Firstly, obviously, if there is a sort of set of plans to go to certain places, letting local councillors know about it would be very useful, because our bread and butter is dealing with local groups and of all different types, and telling, so we can help spread the word. But secondly, as well, I think it sounds like a really good idea to sort of use those relationships we built during the vaccine programme rollout. But I suppose what would be really useful for next time we talk to you is just some evidence and numbers around how that outreach has worked.
Absolutely.
So we can tell the good story. Hopefully that good story can be told.
No, definitely. And on both those points, obviously, fully agree. So we have sort of quite a big network of people that we sort of ask, whether it's through local health watch, residents associations, as you say, yourselves as councillors, to help reach the networks that you have. That's fantastic and always really helpful. In terms of that feedback, where we've gone, the kind of things we've heard, the kind of people we've spoken to, absolutely, we're sort of putting that into reports on quite a regular basis. Not just sort of the numbers we've gone to, but sort of what types of things have we heard, what's come in, but then taking that a step further, what is then being done as a result of it, how has that been listened to in the plan, and help sort of impact what the hospital's going to be. So more than happy to bring that back.
Thank you. Debbie.
Thanks, Chairman. My first question is for Dr. Abbas. I'm thinking, I understand that there will be a shift towards more care in the community, and I'm wondering what services are currently being offered at Hillingdon Hospital that you anticipate won't be offered as part of the new rebuild. I'll just get a few short questions out of the way.
Debbie, I think actually one question at a time possibly works better. So,
okay, yeah,
so yeah,
sure.
and I'm happy for you to. So after the question's answered, you can come back again with your next question.
Okay, so there'll be no change in the type of services that are offered in the hospital. It'll just be that they'll be delivered in a way that's right for patients and staff. So, for example, we won't have, if you're waiting in hospital for a diagnostic test, you won't be waiting as long because you'll have CT scans. So there won't be, it's not as if you won't be able to access emergency care there or paediatric care or maternity care. It'll all be the same, but it'll be part of the joined up care with Hillingdon Health and Care Partners, social care, mental health care, all of those things. But fundamentally, you can still get, general or the specialist care that Hillingdon currently provides.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you. A few questions for Graham, a few quick ones. Is reducing car parking going to be part of the net zero strategy? My second question is about competition amongst contractors. Is there a minimum number of contractors that you need to have in order for a service to be contracted? Is there a danger that perhaps there may only be one or two private companies that are willing to put themselves forward? How do we generate competition? And my third question, they're quick questions, is about this sort of tension between you've tried to put forward a budget that's very, very cost effective, but at the same time you're determined that you don't exceed the budget. And if you've cut all the fat off at this stage, where would the extra funding be sourced if you were to run over budget, if you've already made all of the savings that you can at this stage? I'm thinking particularly about inflation and this is a four-year project.
Okay, so to answer the first one, the first question is on parking. So in terms of the parking provision, we do have a specific number of parkings that will be defined as part of the planning application. Those have to take in consideration both staff parking and staff parking facilities, as well as visitor parking, and it also relates into what is connected into the hospital in terms of bus routes and public transport. So there will be a multi-storey car park, and the defined number of car parks will be set based on looking at both existing car park facilities and also what new drives are coming from the planning department, which is, in some ways is to keep them as low as possible to push people towards public transport. It's a balancing act. So it's going to be kept to an absolute bare minimum, but it does need to be looked at to be both realistic to service the hospital. So in terms of the net carbon zero, there is definitely a drive to get better public transport, but at the same time, it's a balancing act. Okay, I can't be more specific than that on that point. Your second point was on the contractors, on how many contractors. So normally when you go out to a tender thing, a balancing act is sort of 3 contractors. We know that in the market sometimes you don't get the appetite for that. But what we do have is, for the last 20 years or so, with the large hospitals that have been developed, both through public purse and through private development, there are really good benchmarking exercises. So if you don't get the appetite coming in, there are very good mechanisms to double check the sort of benchmarking, so that you don't have something that gets costed out of kilter. So getting people interested, I would think that in an ideal situation you'd want to get 3 serious contenders. If you don't get it, there are checks and measures if you only got 1, say. But there are checks and measures to make sure that their pricing is realistic and within the market. Okay, and then the last thing was about cutting out the fat in the hospital. So I've said we've been very much pressured to keep the building size and how we fit everything into the context of the building within the budget envelope. But within that budget envelope, there are allowances for inflation, and there are thoughts around inflation, because inflation is difficult to predict. So there are big risk factors in for inflation at the moment because it's skyrocketing. And in terms of when you go into an outline business case, there are a number of sort of funding allowances or risk allowances pots that for want of a better term is called optimism bias. It's where you're enthusiastic and you think, well, we'll be able to cut that out. Those are set as percentages by the national team, and we have to keep those in at this stage. We think that our design is more developed at the stage it is now, but we've still got those risk allowances in there. So we haven't cut all that fat out. That's still in there to safeguard against those things. Okay?
Thank you. I've got another question now. Back to me, and then we'll see if anybody else has any other questions. On one of your slide 4, so communications and engagement, right in the bottom right-hand corner, as I look at it anyway, it says a number of comments relate to an aspect which are not yet being considered in detail by the project team. This is an opportunity to set up specific focus groups to explore in more detail. Areas include dementia-friendly facilities, access for different disabilities, feedback from mental health service users, especially around U and EC facilities, layout of waiting areas and reception rooms, and staff facilities including restrooms and changing facilities. So it strikes me there's actually still a lot of really important detail there that can be worked out, which personally I think is a good thing. Can you talk to me a bit about how engagement on those specific different areas is going to be put together?
Yeah. So a lot of those bits that we've referred to, it was referred to earlier about the 1 to 50 plan. So when you start getting into sort of the more detailed, I guess the look of a room, for example, and sort of like layout of a waiting room, and what sort of a pleasant area to sort of like be in terms of one of the things in there was talking about sort of learning disabilities and the sensory issues that people might have. So those aspects kind of come into it. In terms of what we would look at with the engagement, we're very much looking at all of those different groups and going out to them, having those specific conversations. So we're starting that now on the right topic. So it's going out to the same groups multiple times and having the right conversation that means that what they're feeding in is really relevant to the plans and can be heard and responded to. So we would, we might go out now thinking about maternity. We've gone out to groups and we've talked about, do you want to be in a single room or do you want to be in a ward? And we talked about that in terms of like postnatal and prenatal care. We're going out to them now and sort of looking in a little bit more detail about how they've felt about the more the clinical pathways and how that's worked, and that sort of link into the community. When we get onto the next stage, we'll work with the clinical groups to understand, right, what are the questions that we can ask now? And that's when we work with sort of the estates team, the clinical teams, to say, right, from all these different patient groups, what's useful feedback now? What are the topics? And then that's about how we facilitate those conversations. So it's not necessarily that there is a different plan. It's different questions and different facilitation of those questions.
Okay, the reason I asked that question is because just before Christmas, or even early December, I can't remember, I was made aware of a specific issue, and I don't want to comment on this specific issue at the moment, but ultimately it's to do with mental health places of safety and the police, and police and people who maybe need to be assessed hanging around in A&E for too long for a bunch of other reasons that I'm going to discuss with the committee when we talk about our work plan. But ultimately, in terms of finding solutions, one of the solutions potentially might be reconfiguring maybe a space near that where there is a space for those matters to be dealt with in a secure and safe and satisfactory way, for example. And the police feel very strongly about this issue, of course, because they deal with it and others do as well. So is there still facility to have conversations around such things and to be able to adapt spaces to such growing needs such as that? And I don't want an answer on that specific example because I've just but is there that amount of flex or still in the system?
Yeah, well, I think there's probably two elements to this answer. I'm going to look to Jason as part of it. In terms of from an engagement point of view, we will always do as much as we absolutely can, and we will respond to sort of the needs of the programme. In terms of scope for that bit, I think I'll pass over to Jason to answer that.
So, Chair, if I just start with the first bit, and then I'll hand over to Abbas. There's probably two elements that we hope to provide assurance here in answering that question. One is, if we look at the last roadshow, it was a specific question, and it was a specific question from a clinician in one of our partner organisations, and that really hammered home of absolutely we're going through sort of channels with all our partners, but absolutely on that piece where really challenging us on how mental health and integrating really across what is a sort of wide spectrum of patient needs at the front door. Absolutely, we had a big conversation at the roadshow, but then we've had subsequent conversations to really make sure that piece, and I'll let Abbas touch on that, about how we're making sure and double checking. The other piece, just to add for assurance, is the good bit of the new hospitals programme is we're not doing this alone. There's a number of other hospitals who are developing their plans and trying to answer the same sort of spectrum of questions. And it's again one of those things of absolutely anything that we do, we're always checking with other hospitals that are at a similar stage of development of, on that point, how do their layouts look? How have they made sure that they've incorporated the views of everybody? So it is an iterative process, but hopefully there is that assurance that we keep checking ourselves and we are adapting our design. I didn't know if you want to say any more about that particular bit about the front door.
Chair, I mean, I think that's a great question, and I think it's also with COVID and all that's going on, it's amplified so much. But I'm a paediatrician, and I think the 20 patients we've got on the ward, this is particularly confidential, but 5 of those young children and teenagers are there primarily because of a mental health problem. That's a quarter of the ward. So, and Sarah may be able to pick up on the sort of public engagement. But for example, in urgent emergency care, there are going to be rooms that are going to be kitted out for mentally vulnerable patients. So there will be assessment areas specifically for that group of patients. And we've looked at the activity. We've consulted with CNWL, the mental health nurses, and the team working in A&E to make sure that we have an adequate number. And the same, and it's not just mental health coming through A&E, it's also, particularly in elderly care, a lot of patients with elderly care, whether it's dementia or other sort of cognitive, other physical disabilities, will also have mental disabilities as part of that. And it's how we create a ward environment for those. And what I'm really pleased about is it's not just senior doctors who are the leads for some of this work. It's actually our senior nurses and our other healthcare professionals, because they are looking, as a doctor, and it sounds a bit churlish, but I'll do a ward round, but actually the 24-hour care is by other healthcare professionals. So they are actually the leads for the inpatient area. And I think by working together, having the right clinicians working with those groups, we will have all of those areas that will transform the services that we have for that. And underpinning that, I think next week or the week after, the most recent version of the EQIA, the Quality Impact Assessment, was going to be signed off by the programme board. And I think that will be a reference document. So anybody working on the project will need to refer to that and say, are my services, is my area providing that whatever your equality or diversity or inclusion need. Now, it's a challenging agenda, but I think if we have that as a focus, as a basis for all of those areas, I hope we'll get most, if not all of it, right.
So, would it be possible, Jason, for me to email you introducing you to somebody in the police service who deals with this matter and has some interesting views about A&E and how mental health patients are dealt with in A&E? Because I think that'd be a really good conversation for you guys to have. And I understand everyone has opinions and there's lots of, you've got to be doing things, but I think that'd be a useful bit of feedback. So if I pass him to you, Jason, then you can get him to speak to the right person, and then he can at least talk about his experience.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I would think the answer to this would probably be pretty short, but a while back we were discussing about potentially tying in with a local university, and therefore the hospital becoming more of a university hospital. Is that now not the case?
So I'm sitting next to Abbas, who throughout the evening, sometimes we refer to him as a doctor, sometimes we refer to him as a professor. But that is sort of the piece that absolutely highlights the university piece of Abbas is a doctor and a clinician, but also closely aligned with Brunel, and so we are very much looking to sort of go forward with them both in the development of a medical school that will be opening there shortly, and how we look at going forward on that agenda, but absolutely, sometimes people forget the university bit, obviously, and I'll let Abbas talk about that bit, the clinical bit's important, but also for a number of our staff groups who work in the hospital are non-clinical. And again, how we work academically with them, if you look at digital particularly, and sort of workforce, we're working very closely with Brunel at the moment about how we can really strengthen our plans working with them. So they've been really, really helpful actually, and we want to keep taking that forward. I don't know if you want to say anything about the
no, I mean, look, this is my third or fourth attempt at a rebuild. And it's pretty clear from the centre that something that complicated it, I mean, of course, as a clinician, I'd love the hospital to have been on the university site, but it was a no-goer centrally because it was too complex. Fundamentally, what Hillingdon needs is a hospital that provides the current services, but in a more organised and a modern way. And the centre found it complicated to say, well, you're going to build an academic centre, you might bring other trusts like Harefield and Brompton, and other things on site, and it was just too much. And take too long. Now, actually the distance between the new hospital and Brunel, I mean, I walk it every other day. It's actually the size of some big university campuses. I fundamentally don't think that the hospital being on the current site and Brunel being where it is a problem. And I think, in my time we set up the physician associate program, the nursing schools opened at Brunel. I mean, I'm the lead for clinical placements for the medical school. So I had a session this afternoon, and I think by developing the staff co-working and particularly focusing on the workforce, I think that will really strengthen the partnership between the university and the trust. And I'm sure Caroline will have a view on it because there are big opportunities on the Brunel site to develop some of the sort of primary care. I mean, I think that's where the physical site of Brunel should be focusing much more on primary and community care and supporting the workforce and the digital agenda to support the new hospital. That's my personal view, and that's what we're working towards.
Sorry, just to follow up on that. So you see it as much more of a strong collaboration rather than Hillingdon becoming a university hospital?
Correct.
Thank you.
Massive. But I think, you can have the badge, but fundamentally is what does the badge do? The problem is you can't, it's a moot point, but you can't actually become a university hospital anymore. You can become a teaching trust. They've restructured the whole thing. So like West Hertfordshire, they wanted to be, or Watford General, as a lot of us know, they wanted to be a university hospital trust, but then had become a teaching hospitals trust because that's kind of the new thing. But under all of these labels is actually what you practically do in terms of your collaboration. And it's had, I mean, I'll be honest and say we've had our ups and downs, but when I look back now, when I look at it now and the opportunity where we are currently and the opportunities for future, particularly with the new Vice Chancellor who I'm meeting next week, I think we're in a much stronger position to collaborate, and I think we understand, we understand each other's positions and where we can support each other. I'm really excited about it, actually.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
I mean, it is a great advantage that the distance between them is so small. So we build a brilliant new hospital, and then whatever happens in the future, makes it a bit easier, I suppose. But thank you, June.
On that topic, then, what happens with Mount Vernon? But that's not my question because Mount Vernon is part of the trust property. So would that be a sub in one of your diagnostics or something? That would be a question.
June, should we let them answer that question and you can
Yeah.
get back to it? Because I think I had written that down, but hadn't asked it yet. So I think it's a very good question.
Thank you. So absolutely, Hillingdon Hospitals is Hillingdon Hospital and Mount Vernon Hospital. The key piece over the next sort of 5 years. So where Graham sort of said, how in your question, how do you keep the site working? How do you keep a clean build and the sort of existing services working? What we're doing over the next 5 years is utilising the Mount Vernon site more. So Mount Vernon over the short medium term is becoming busier on a number of fronts. What that will culminate in is if you look at the Mount Vernon site, we own, so Hillingdon Hospitals own the Mount Vernon site, but there's a number of providers on the site. So, and probably the piece from a patient perspective that people see most is the cancer centre. and there are ongoing discussions at the moment about how the cancer centre proposals will be taken forward. So what we are looking at doing is, if we look at where I referenced earlier, the new hospitals programme is going from 40 to 48. There is in that bidding process, one of those bids to become one of those new 8 is the cancer centre. And so what we're looking to do is we're working very closely with all the partners who are involved in the cancer centre, and when it becomes sort of a little bit more confirmed and clarified how those plans will go forward, what we are proposing to do in a few years' time then is all the partners to come around the table and then just say from our residents, staff and everybody's perspective with all the partners, what do we want Mount Vernon to be? But the key piece for us is to get clarity first on what is happening with the cancer centre.
Okay, thank you for that. The other thing is, I wanted us to leave this for the last. I thought we were coming up for the last, but I'll throw it in anyway because I hold it back, is in preparation for the fundings that you will get, and you said it's at a stage where you might be the next step in reconsidering, because that's why everything is coming together to do your presentation. If financially that is not fully funded, what's your plan B?
So the great thing, whether I'm sounding hopelessly naive, is I think hopefully Plan A is such a compelling case from all levels that people absolutely see the value for money. So where Rachel referenced earlier the outline business case, the outline business case is a series of chapters that people, so there's a strategic case, there's an economic case, and all of these chapters have to really be able to demonstrate about why that one option really works. And the key piece for us is, from a patient perspective, in terms of our investment objectives, about absolutely delivering what is required from sort of serving the local population, but at the same time of really being able to demonstrate that it's the better value for money to give us the money to do the big one-stage hospital, because you'll get a better return on it. And I think, gosh, looking around at faces around here, I think if we all stick our sort of history hat on of the Hillingdon Hospital, if we drive in at the moment and you've got the tower block, it was almost referred to, as far as I understand from sort of talking to people previously, meant to be a two-stage development. So the tower block was meant to be an L shape, which is why I understand that's why the lifts are in the wrong place. And so the key piece for us is we've learnt our lesson about two-stage developments. We are absolutely really focusing on people understanding the merits from investment objectives on all fronts, both the clinical and the financial, about giving us that money for the one stage.
You would not be considering any private finance in that?
So from our perspective, we are part of sort of the programme that's very much shaped by national policy. So absolutely, the last, gosh, and I'll probably get this wrong, but at least a couple of decades has been new hospitals were funded through private finance initiative, which in effect was a consortium of banks and builders sort of put up the money to build the hospital. A builder built the hospital, and then when you moved into the hospital, you paid it off like a mortgage. Yes. And now, in terms of the cycle of how people want to make sure, from a sort of taxpayer perspective, you get the best value for money, the new this generation of hospitals that's referenced in the sort of health infrastructure plan going forward will be funded by public dividend capital, which at a simple level is money from the Treasury.
I mean, the funding basically is dictated by the top, isn't
Yeah.
it? So, I mean, I think what's positive, very positive actually for us at the moment, is the amount of effort spent by everyone from the Treasury downwards, because this isn't us, you know, Jason and his team going ahead doing lots of stuff and then turning up and knocking on the door tomorrow as the Treasury say, look what we've done, can you give us some money? You know, there's been so much effort put in along all different levels of government, so if it wasn't to happen, that's a lot of time and money wasted across all levels, so hopefully, along with the details that we have so far, that puts us in good stead. But I am a natural optimist. So, anyway, Hina.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question is more for Sarah. Okay. Yeah, I'll just let you do musical chairs first. Good exercise. Burn some calories, yes. Thank you, Sarah. So I understand you're going to continue to have dialogue with different focus groups. Have you given consideration to local health charities?
So we've been doing quite a bit of outreach with lots of different groups. So I'm having a complete mind blank of the last couple of groups we've just spoken to. But we've done quite a lot of work with Health Watch. So they've been really helpful in kind of giving us sort of connections in with certain groups and sort of helping us sort of navigate some sort of the best people to speak to and how work they've done in the past has worked really well. We have worked with a couple of local charities. We've met with Mind recently ahead of doing some of the work that we want to do with sort of their service users and everything. So, I mean, I think it probably is very similar to my earlier point, that we are doing quite a bit of work. I'm more than happy to share the groups that we are planning to speak to as well. And then if there's other groups that you feel aren't on there that should be, you know, please add to it, because it's not an exhaustive list and open to suggestions.
You finished? Yes. That would be very helpful, because it would also help us as community councillors, community workers, as councillors, to help to share that as well with the groups because there's small groups around that we are engaged with, and that will help them to know what's going on, and perhaps you can go and speak to them. Not only the small groups, but you've got schools as well and other community groups that's isolated in some way that we can share that with you to enable you to engage more with the community.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I'll put that list together and share it with you all. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's it, isn't it? Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much. That was really, really interesting, and we're going to keep our fingers and everything else crossed that the next time we hear from you, the funding will be there and everything. But it does feel very positive to me, so thank you. Next, we're going to discuss our work programme, so Hillingdon Hospital team can leave. Caroline, if you wouldn't mind, it'll only take 5 minutes, but as you're the star of our next meeting, yeah, well, I think that might be useful. Yes, it might be useful. So it won't take long though. Sorry. Okay. Excellent. So right. Yes. Right. So we're going just finally onto our work programme. The reason I asked Caroline to remain is because for our next meeting we're looking at Hillingdon Health and Care Partnership integrating care systems. So essentially this is the new way. When I say new, it's sort of new, hasn't it? For last year it's been embedding, but a new way of sort of getting our healthcare partners to work together better and efficiently and to deliver great services. And so a while back we decided that after about a year or so of you doing this role, Caroline, that it'd be a great time for us to do a review on it. So I just wanted to sort of suggest what interests me, and if anybody else is interested in anything else, they can sort of give you a heads up before you come, so you have an idea about what we might be interested in. I mean, for me it's very basic, you know, why are we doing this? What are the improvements that are being made, and any examples of how, you know, the working together has been able to deliver better services, because this is a completely new thing for us. So those are the things that would most interest me.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, if anyone else has got sort of particular queries, but I think. Yeah, so just to reiterate, if anyone's got particular queries, obviously I'll come back. But what I was broadly going to cover was kind of the broader context, because it's something that is happening across the country. But actually in Hillingdon, I think we are in a very good position because there's been a lot of partnership working previously. So I'll talk about the broader context, but also some of the specifics around Hillingdon. And actually we've been doing a lot of work. Once I gave my microphone up, I was very quiet there, but actually there's a lot of work going on in terms of how we join up the transformation and the innovation on partnership working to support the work with the new hospital build as well, so that it's not that, you know, the redevelopment around the hospital also is a real opportunity for us to increase some of our pace of change. And so some of the things we talked about in terms of digital and workforce, actually that spans beyond the hospital walls and into the community, and how we really make the most of those innovations going forward. So that was what I was planning to bring back, but yeah.
Fantastic. Also, what might be interesting is how commissioning on North West London level might be working as well, from your perspective, because you know, a lot of the issues you deal with is getting funds to the right places and learning about them, because obviously that, again, that's a newish thing, so that might sort of come up as well. Okay, so excellent. So the rest of our workflow, Graham, won't interest you too much, Caroline, so you can leave. Thank you very much. Yeah. Oh.
Will you be continuing to manage the whole Northwest bit? Because there's changes happening, isn't it, in around the commissioner? Will you still be part and parcel of that?
So I actually, although I look the same, I'm actually doing a new job to what I was doing previously. So, and I think we can cover it in the next meeting, but just to give you a bit of a kind of context for that. Whereas we used to have Hillingdon CCG, and that was where I was managing director of Hillingdon CCG for a number of years. Now that's transitioning, so there is a single North West London CCG. So all of the 8 boroughs in North West London have become a single CCG, and that's for sort of a range of reasons, which again I can sort of cover probably in more detail next time. But one of the sort of other sides of that is so that we can really focus on integrating working in a borough. So my job title is the same, I'm still managing director, but I'm now managing director of Hillingdon Health and Care Partners, which is the place-based partnership, working really closely with the CCG at North West London, but it's more a real focus on looking at integrated care, looking at bringing the providers of care together and making sure all of those pathways are joined up. So slightly different focus, still working across the system, and yeah, there's now one single North West London CCG. But yeah, so it's probably a bit confusing that it's the same person, but doing a slightly different job.
Because that's such a good answer, Simon now has a question.
Sorry, Caroline. With your sort of CCG head on, how likely do you think that the funding will come through for the new hospital?
Yeah, and they've all gone now. It's a very different funding route. So what I would go back to is really the North West London CCG and the North West London Integrated Care System, or ICS, as Jason explained earlier, are sort of now aligned. So we've basically got one North West London sort of overseeing body in essence, and that body is very much supportive of the Hillingdon Hospital rebuild. So all of the people, the executive team at North West London ICS, some of whom were previously at North West London CCG, have given sort of formal indications of support, and as we go through the business case phases, we'll continue to do that. So from a CCG or ICS perspective, absolutely. I think, you know, the question is only then in terms of treasury and response there, which unfortunately I don't have any remit over.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Chairman. I'm definitely done. Excellent. Thank you. Is that everybody for Caroline? Caroline can definitely go now. Thank you. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Okay, right. And also, I think it was agreed that we'll add on GPs delivering online services at our next meeting as well, because I do know they're looking at the contract now and thinking about how they do this, and I think it's something that comes into my inbox as an issue that residents are concerned about. So, excellent. Simon, yes?
It was just a question on the workflow plan. Usually when we do the health updates, we do that over 2 nights. Is that still going to be the case?
I was coming to that. We're only on February. But I love your keenness. Is that a request to do it over 2 nights?
It was a question, Chairman, not a request by any means.
So,
Do you want me to?
No, I'll do that. I want to take credit for that. So anyway, quickly, we'll go into 22nd of March. Obviously, this is our normal one of the police and the Hillingdon officers deal with it, but also the London Fire Brigade as well, who we've not spoken to. So and I think they've got some interesting issues going on there as well. So they're very happy to come along and talk to us about what's happening with the fire service locally, so I think that's a good mix. Then we come on to our normal health updates. So, yeah, I mean, my view when I became chairman was that over 2 nights wasn't effective use of anybody's time, because ultimately by the second night especially, the tiredness and the intensity of it meant that I don't think we did, not that we did, but I don't think the scrutiny level was worth the effort, shall we say. So, are you going to say something else?
If I can.
Yeah, of course, go for it.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know if members recall, but in the past we've used those meetings, when it's been 2 meetings, to do the quality account reports, and they are phenomenally large generally, and we often didn't get them by the time we had the meeting, which then felt it was a little bit redundant having the 2 meetings and not actually having the document to be able to scrutinise. So what's generally happened over the last couple of years is that we've received the reports outside of the meetings. We've then put together a 1,000-word, up to 1,000-word response from the committee, which you've contributed to, and are able to do that outside of the meetings within the 30 days that we have, because obviously we have this time constraint with regards to being able to provide the responses, and then using the actual meetings instead for something a little less onerous.
Yeah, and more focused. So, essentially, that was the other reason as well. It just didn't feel like the 2 meetings were working and using a good use of time. So one thing that we need to think about before that meeting is how to focus it. And it might be a case of some of the people we want to speak to, some of the people maybe don't need to speak to every single year, for example, or there's specific issues that we may or may not need to speak about. So that's why it's 1 instead of 2 meetings.
I was just aware when we did do it all on one meeting, I think one of the meetings ran until sort of 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. It was ridiculous.
That won't happen. That won't. No. Very conscious about being efficient, effective, and streamlining that stuff. So very true.
On the crime and disorder one that's coming up, can we please have and make sure we have a really in-depth discussion in regards to the crime and disorder report coming out, as well, have a good in-depth discussion with the chairman, because the last meeting we had with him, we didn't really get a full flow of and was able to ask full questions on the different wards and the crime results, because that was a private.
Oh yes, the person from the from the local. Your Neighbourhood Watch, wasn't it?
The Neighbourhood.
It was Neighbourhood Watch we were sort of talking about, the Neighbourhood Watch.
And we really didn't get an opportunity to question that individual on the report that was presented to us. So it's a report that was presented, and we really weren't able to scrutinise it. So if we're going to go down that route, can we really be able to have that opportunity to speak on that?
Okay. I mean, he isn't invited at the moment, but we could invite him again, because I did think it was very good having his perspective. So, yeah, okay. And just for clarity, I mean, he asked to be put in part 2. So, but I think having listened to his testimony, I think a lot of it could have been in part 1 anyway. So me and Nikki might talk to him about doing that, so to make sure it is publicly available what he talks about.
To be honest, there was no need, you're correct, for part 2, because the results that he presented in the report is already out in the public domain. So we should have been able to have that opportunity to ask questions on certain aspects of it. But I think it was overloading at the time. So, but for future, let's not have that.
Okay, yeah, no, great. Darren.
Would it be worth for the 22nd of March to have police licence in here as well? Would it be worth to have police licence in here for crime and disorder? I'm not sure if we can invite them.
What do you mean by police licence?
So Met Police have a licensing department. I know for a fact in my ward we have 2 or 3 licensed premises, and I'd be quite keen to know what sort of crime and disorder are coming from them. I don't know if we can ask them to attend, but I know for a fact where I am, we've got 3-4 licensed premises that I'd be really intrigued to see what's going on and what they reckon.
Okay, well, we can definitely get them to talk about that, so we can ask them to come and talk about that.
there is a specific licensing officer for Hillingdon.
But yeah, definitely we can invite that person. No.
Yeah, but also you can find out that information if you send in an ME to licensing action in your specific area to specify what's happened, and that should be able to be given to you with not only the licensing department but also with your SNTs. They should be able to supply you with that.
I mean, just if I can come back on that, yeah, I mean, obviously if we invited the licensing person, it'd be to talk about broad sort of policy and all this sort of stuff. It wouldn't be about the specific, you know, the items in your ward.
No, I would be interested across the whole borough.
So
I know for a fact at the moment I think there's something like 172 different licensed premises. And what sort of crime and disorder are we getting out of them? What effect is that having on our residents?
And how are we managing that?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, that's an interesting one which we've not spoken to. And in terms of our June meeting, so we've got CAMS at the moment. Currently, how do I approach this? So essentially, just in December, we were approached by the police who wanted to talk to us about an issue they were facing in terms of the amount of police time being used, staying with people who potentially may have mental health issues but need to be examined before the police can be released. Now, in general terms, we have a place in Riverside where people can be kept in a safe, secure environment. The police can be released quickly, but also at the same time, people who, you know, obviously probably in distress and not in a great place are able to be in a sort of safe and secure environment. Now, the amount of cases has risen so much that over 70% of cases that police have locally are being taken to Hillingdon Hospital A&E, and the difference in time is if they take them to the Riverside Centre, 2 police officers spend on average about an hour and a half. If they take them to Hillingdon Hospital A&E, on average they spend about 4.5 hours. So that's 2 policemen, if you imagine that, so that's 9 hours, and it can be a lot longer. Now, you know, and not just in terms of police not being free to do policing jobs. Of course, you have people in a busy, hectic environment who are not in a great place to be in such an environment, so it's actually a health issue in terms of managing those people, because if you imagine the resources it takes as well, and it's definitely a growing problem. So we had conversations with a bunch of people you know, across the health and the police area, and I think that we're in a position we can present a mini sort of summary of our findings for the next meeting, Nikki. Yeah. In terms of being able to have a single meeting on this issue, which, you know, obviously I raised a bit of it tonight, where we have in some evidence, and then we're able to produce a report making some recommendations in terms of how to improve the situation. Now, if once you see the evidence we've collected so far at our next meeting, and you think that is possible, I would suggest that we, in the June meeting, we have the evidence session on that issue, and then we move the CAMS to the next meeting. Obviously, all of this is dependent on who's sitting in this chair and the election result. I know that, but that is my thinking. Does that sound like a positive way forward? It is. Sorry, mic on. Sorry.
The hospitals do not have the facilities to keep those people secure. This is why the police officers' time is taken up with it. I think it was discussed about a special room when you brought up the mental health bit. They don't have it in Hillingdon Hospital. It's only Riverside, and Riverside doesn't have much space. They don't have the staff. They don't have the psychiatrists. So to enable that, a policeman there, probably it is not nice to see a patient being handcuffed to a policeman to stop them, or not only hurting themselves but other people around them. It's not nice, but there is no staff, no psychiatrists, and no facilities to enable that. Also, there is not enough out of office, what you will call out of order partners, you call link workers, that someone can call up to help. So people go into crisis, and that's what causes the crisis.
No, I have to say, I think in very broad terms, one of the things I wanted to find out is how serious the issue was, if it's a consistent issue or if it's just a COVID spike. I think. Thank you, June. I do understand that, June. Sorry, I was just sort of summing up. I was basically saying, June, that you are completely correct. So no, indeed. Indeed. So yeah, no, completely, and so because before bringing it to the committee, I wanted to find all that stuff out. So rather than speaking to everyone, I should have just spoken to June. But yes, next time I know it'll be quicker. But yes, so we'll bring. No, of course. Yeah, no, of course. So we'll for the next meeting, we'll just under the work agenda, we'll have a quick, a shortish paper on what we found, and then the June meeting, I think we will do with that. But CAMS is very serious, and I think we should do another investigation next year on CAMS. And I think next year, depending on the election result and who's in charge and whatever, a specific sort of mental health type of focus might be happening. Actually, is my feeling.
So moving CAMS to July,
yes,
provisionally. Yes. Thank you.
So I think that's everything. Does anybody else want to raise anything? No? Okay, well, I'll draw this meeting to a close.